Good morning to you all. It's really an honor to be here on stage, to be able to share my thoughts with you. Thank you, Roman, for inviting me here, and thank you all the organizations that supported this event for having it and hosting us. It's an intriguing question indeed that you've just put on the slide. Is it possible for a government to decide to switch to a circular economy without knowing how to do it? And actually that's what we're doing in the Netherlands, where I come from. And I think also in many European Union countries. We have committed ourselves to switch to this circular economy, but what it is exactly and how to get there, that is, well, really an intriguing question. And in this presentation I will share some of my thoughts on circular building and circular cities, and some of the approaches that we use in the Netherlands of trying to understand together public and private companies and public organizations and citizens and NGOs on how it will be possible to get there. And now I'm really wondering how to operate my slides. Yes, that's crucial. Thank you. A circular economy. Well, I guess this is a familiar picture to most of you, but I'll just briefly go through it in case you don't fully understand the concept, or to the extent that it is understandable. It sort of suggests that we have to change from a linear way of take, make and waste products from our environment, materials from our environment into products. In a linear way, we have to bend this linear mode into a circular mode. So we have to reduce our resource use, try to use it as much as possible, as long as possible, in a high quality as possible. And then, if we really can't use it anymore, then we should get rid of the waste, or treat the waste in a highly responsible way. And that is what this circular economy is about. But there are a few conditions of this circular economy, and that's also where the word economy comes in. One is that the reduction of resources is essential, and the reuse of resources. And the idea is that it will pay to reduce and reuse resources. And how will it pay? Well, usually because the price of raw material and raw resources is higher than the prices of secondary materials and resources. So reuse pays. But in our present economy, it doesn't. So how to get there, how to make it affordable and economically sensible to reuse these materials? Well, and then, of course, we can, on the one hand, wait for scarcity to come in, but it might take too long, considering the environmental impact of the way we use resources. And the second way of doing it is that we could create an artificial scarcity. And that is where the government comes in, for example, because you can create a tax system which taxes the use of raw materials, or you can give subsidies to the reuse of materials. Also, new business models can provide for this. And these new ways of institutional moderation of how our economy works, these institutional changes needed, that is really the biggest challenge, I think, of this idea of the circular economy. This is a very famous picture of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. It has been drawn up in 2010, one of her first reports. And it positions, or it pictures, the way we could reuse our resources and how we could reduce the resource use in our economic systems. And she shows one for the biological cycles and one for the more grey industrially produced cycles. And this is really, and as it says in the name of this graph, it's an industry perspective. So this is especially about the production and use of resource flows within industry and the various levels at which you can close loops. So, for example, you can close loops in a very small scale, reuse products, but you can also have a bit bigger scale and perhaps first wait for a product to get wasted and then start to reuse it in another way. There is also a more spatially oriented perspective towards the circular economy, where also the place matters, whereas this industry perspective is a bit footloose and it also addresses these global value chains and global change of trade of commodities. This spatial perspective is more about cities and buildings and the way cities, where they get their products from and where they get their resources from. So what you see here in this slide is on the left-hand side the input of materials, like food, energy, goods. And then on the right-hand side, you see the output. And the idea is that we should, once materials or resources are in the system, we should use it to the maximum as possible. And that is where the closed loops come in. And what the nice thing I like about this graph is these concentric circles that shows the impact on the local environment and the regional environment of cities as well, because you have to imagine where do you get your resources from, huh? And the further away you get your resources, the higher the impact of, or the further away also the impact of our urban life and our cities. So this is really a more spatial perspective, and this is also a graph which appeals to the concept of urban mining, for example. It's also a fashionable concept at the moment, and urban mining promotes the idea of looking at the city as a mine of resources, of secondary resources, which could be potentially be reused. In Dutch national policies, we have come to the development of several ideas of circular economy as well. And in 2016, we had the program, launched the program Netherlands Circular in 2050. And there was, like we tend to do in the Netherlands, it's all about public and private collaboration and negotiating together with the key public stakeholders, private stakeholders, on feasible roads towards transition. And there were 5 national government transition agendas, one addressing building and construction. And a very ambitious challenge was set. In 2030, we should reduce 50% of our primary resource use. In 2030, it's 10 years from now. So it's really incredible, because especially if you think of the built environment, buildings are not built over a day, and the planning processes and the design of buildings, it takes time. And if you just look at all the plans that are being prepared at the moment, it will be very challenging to change all these existing plans in the pipeline to change them towards 2030. So it will be really challenging. At the same time, I think that lots of people involved in formulating these ambitions, they know that perhaps it might be unrealistic to achieve this goal. But what it did achieve was set in motion a process, a sector-wide process of lots of building and construction companies, real estate developers, housing companies, and also all the government levels involved to sit together and to think of, well, how to tackle this problem. And they started to develop an implementation program with short to medium-term actions and programs. At the same time, these circular economy policies, these were a bit, well, top-down, you could say. Government pushed policies, but they were fed by a breeding ground that developed in the years before. In 2008, like many countries all over the world, the financial crisis hit us, which led to austerity in funding, lots of projects being put on hold. And at the same time, there were technological developments that empowered citizens, that made decentralized technologies available at an affordable price, so people could afford solar panels, decentralized sanitation systems. There were platform technologies available to communicate and organize each other. And also under the idea of citizens, do it yourself, we can organize our communities and our cities in a better way than perhaps government or private companies can do for us. We want to take the lead in establishing our own environment. And on the bottom left, you see a picture of citizens really trying to take control, or at least call for government action. There was a court case in the Netherlands organized by a very activist group of citizens, and they demanded in court that government should live up to the ambitions and the policy targets it set itself with regards to climate change. And they won this court case. So ever since these past few years, there's time and again, there is a strong push from society, from civil society to our government, please stick to your promises and take action. With regards to the implementation program, I will tell you a bit about some of the actions and projects that are going on at the moment. We've got a sector-wide platform, Circular Building 2023, where all the big players, all the key stakeholders in the sector of the built environment are collaborating together with formulating new norm standards, tools to help us to deliver this circular built environment. And a governance system has been set up to organize this process. So there is a council to coordinate and direct the whole process. And there are action teams working on tangible actions to be put in place. I was involved in one of these action teams that run the past year, and it was about framework and definitions for circular building. It addressed the essential concept of circular building. What is it? What can we agree upon? And we addressed the concept or the framework of circular building, of what it should address. And what you see here in this spiral is that you should look at a building not just as one entity in a particular place in time, but you should look at it from a life cycle perspective and not just consider the building to be there, but also consider the next stages within its life cycle. So also consider the use and the maintenance aspects and the end-of-life aspects of buildings, and then also the next life cycle stages. And then if you look at it from that point of view, then you see, or then you start to understand that in the design process of a building, some key decisions are made that not only influence the performance during its current use and lifespan, but also for future use and lifespan, because then you start to think of, well, what kind of materials do I use? Are they renewable? Are they durable? Can I reuse them in another way in the next life stage of the building. Is the building demountable? Huh? Can I take it apart? Can I reuse it for other purposes? And if you start to look at a building like that in the design phase already, you start to understand that you need to include the facility manager, you need to include the financer, you need to include the interior decorator, and all these kind of stakeholders need to be involved much more upfront in a process. Another action team involved the development of a measuring rod or a measuring tool for the circularity of buildings. Because one thing is to talk about it in a more abstract way, but the other thing is that we also want to know, well, what is it that we can measure and how can we assess, well, the circularity of a building? And that's, of course, very challenging when there are lots of competing definitions, lots of conflicting interests. But also in a sector-wide process, a start has been made to establish measurement criteria and ways of measuring, and it measures the whole life cycle. And for at the present state, we can measure what is there and what has been used, what kind of materials have been put in, how it has been produced. But you can also start to measure or estimate the expected impact of a building and the expected availability of materials, the expected energy use, etc. of buildings. So this measurement tool will be used also in the coming 2 years to assess lots of circular building projects in the Netherlands, and we will evaluate those projects together with the people in the sector, and we will see, well, what can we learn from it and where can we set the standard for a circular building. So what is it that we could already implement in laws and regulations? What can we implement in procurement policies? And what is there that we can ask on a voluntary basis but is feasible already? There are different, besides these more tangible tools, there are also some guiding principles that should be used when designing circular buildings, circular cities. And it has to do with a sort of common sense of this understanding of circularity. And whereas lots of circular initiatives, they start at the end of life stage. For example, when you look at the waste problem and when you've got a lot of waste, you immediately start to focus on, well, opportunities to reuse or recycle that waste. And that is, of course, very beneficial, and especially when you have those waste streams available, you should try to treat them as sensible as possible. And reuse them and recycle them as much as possible. But in the end, of course, you want to reduce or prevent the production of waste. And that is where you can go up in the priority list of these, the 10 R's as has been defined. So you would rather want to refuse the use of raw materials, and if you need to use them, decrease the amount as much as possible, and so on. So prevention is key. And in the meantime, when we have produced waste, we should recycle it, reuse it as much as possible. But prevention, start at the start of a cycle, that's key in designing processes for a circular economy. Another very fashionable way of thinking in circular building and circular cities has to do with the different speed with which products are becoming obsolete, and the lifespan of different parts of a product are being taken into account. And this is a famous graph by Stuart Brand, in which he positions the building layers with the different lifespans. And you can see the site and the structure. I've got eternal or very long lifespans, but the stuff you put in, the piping and wiring, has got a much shorter lifespan. And this understanding might also lead to understand the way you design your building as a system, this system perspective that also Eva Gledek spoke about. If you understand a building or a built environment in this way, you will come to design principles that will urge you to consider the lifespans of these different parts, but also the way to modify and adapt these different layers in due time. Because if you put all your wiring inside the walls, you have to break them apart if you want to change them. Just a very simple example, but it shows the inadaptability of some of our buildings and the way we design them. Another initiative that has taken place is the development of an audit system for circular building projects. And that is where, this is the project where this measuring tool will be used and further developed. And these are some of the key players involved in starting to measure these buildings and really to share the lessons learned, and the positive lessons learned, but also the negative lessons learned. So these are public and private organizations, also private building and construction companies that have really declared themselves to be willing to open up their projects, to really look at the finances as well, at the business cases, and to learn from it and to share it amongst their competitors as well. So this is a very nice project, and perhaps also, Roman, for you, it's very nice to see that this man, Rutger Boeg, is one of our circular promoters in the Netherlands that set up a sort of network of professionals in circular building, and he pushes it from a bottom-up point of view. He pushes industry and government to change. So these action perspectives to circular building, an overview of where we are now. As I said, we're defining what circular buildings are. We try to understand them, try to develop measurement tools to assess circularity. We also are actively engaged in searching for new collaborations that are needed for delivering these circular buildings and circular built environments, including institutional changes needed, changes of laws and institutions, but also organizational changes needed. Because building one circular building for an organization is doable, because you can label it as a special project, and there are special rules for it. But if you want to build all the buildings that you deliver as an organization in a circular way, then you really need fundamental changes in your organization. Another instrument that is being developed at the moment are the building passports. Well, like you have a personal passport, you can also have a passport for buildings, showing which materials are in there, how they are organized, and this will help with redesigning the building when it needs to be adapted, but it also facilitates the reuse of materials that are present in that building if you want to use them for a different purpose. So if you want to demolish the building or take it apart, you know what materials are there, what the quality is, and then you can think of a way to reuse them. Lots of cities have started to adopt circular policies as well. So besides the more project-oriented, object-oriented policies of industrial partners and central government, also cities have become very active in developing circular policies. The city of Amsterdam is one of the front runners in this in the Netherlands, and they have published their lessons learned so far. So again, it's a very open process in which they are quite honest about what they can deliver, what they have learned so far, and what they still need to learn. What you see, for example, is that there are some knowledge instruments like the passports and the measurement tools. They have started to adopt circular public procurement policies. For some products, it's easier than for other products, and especially on a product level, is where it is mostly suited. If you think of the circular development of areas, it is becoming more challenging already. They did develop a circular procurement policy for land as well. They tried it on 3 projects so far, and we will be evaluating how they have experienced that and to what extent it really, what can we say about the circularity that it led to. What these initiatives also show that the higher level you come, spatially, the more complex circularity gets as well. So for manufactured components, it's quite easy to set ambitions and targets for the circular production and reuse of products or parts of products, and design institutions that match business models that facilitate it. But when you come to higher level, to buildings or built environments or cities even, it becomes much more difficult because there's so much more included, so many more issues involved. And it's not just about materials, but it's also about people, the way they interact, socioeconomic effects, jobs are involved. So that becomes much more fuzzy, the discussion. And then again, who's responsible becomes a much more challenging question to answer as well, because then we come to a collective responsibility of government, industry, and society, and then it becomes a real challenge of, well, how to put institutions in place that help us to support that. Well, some examples of these different levels, and the easiness or the challenging aspect to introduce this. Circular materials, this is a very nice example of a company in the Netherlands, Stone Cycling. They recycle stones and bake new ones out of it, and you can even get them in different colors. So it's a very nice example of that it is possible. They did develop a matching business model. What is their biggest challenge is the scale at which to deliver, because they can deliver it at a small scale, but if you want to really redevelop an urban district, the demand is too high for them to deliver it at one moment in time. So matching supply and demand is one of these key challenges for them. On the building component level, there are also quite some nice examples going on. We've got circular carpets that will be refurbished after use and then sold again. There is the example of the circular kitchen being developed together with housing companies by TU Delft. And there is an example of a circular facade even of a building in which you can put all the smart technologies needed for running a building in a very efficient way. Other examples are also a bit more higher scale. This is our espresso bar at the Faculty of Architecture. Whenever you have a chance to visit us, please do come. And this is made up of the window frames of a demolished building in the city of The Hague. But we've got also, adaptive, very flexible student housing. I'm not sure if it's very nice to live, but these are former containers which have been adapted they made living spaces out of it, and you can just put them and stack them wherever they are needed. And there are, well, more examples also on a building level of circular buildings which are meant to be reused in the future. Of course, especially of these buildings, we do not know yet if they really will be circular, because only the future will tell if the materials will be reused. Also on the level of urban area development, we try to develop them in a circular way, which becomes even more challenging, because then there are very different options and many options to think of. These are, on the left-hand side, these are two examples in the city of Amsterdam, in which Metropolitan has also been involved in developing the system of a system of local treatment of flows, and a closed system with housing boats, with a closed loop system of for energy and sanitation. On the right-hand side, there is an example of an area where an industrial area with lots of small industries, small businesses, where they put a resource manager was hired by the municipality to see, well, what kind of flows are there in the region and how can you connect them? And this led to the reuse of materials, building materials to be used again within the same area. And there was also a very nice initiative of a local beer brewer who had a waste product from the brewery process, and it is now used by a local baker to make bread of it. So that is a very nice way of closing a loop locally. At the same time, this local beer has become so famous and the demand is so high that they now are thinking of shifting their production to Poland because of cost. And also, this puts into this resource exchange with the bakery, it's no longer tenable. So they will keep it up, but more out of a symbolic point of view than that it actually delivers. So that is also, this scaling of production is really a challenge in this circular economy. And that is, I think, also one of the speakers spoke about the growth, the growth paradigm with which we've all been raised. To what extent do we need to grow, and where are our boundaries? And is growth always better if you think of how it might disrupt local loops? So it is a challenge to get from buildings to areas, and what kind of perspectives do you have then to close loops? Should it also always be on a local level, or could you think of regional levels, or perhaps beyond the regional level? There are different values to be weighed. No, this is another example of having these local loops with local job creation when you want to reuse materials locally and remanufacture them. And it might really lead to a sustainable neighborhood, small-scale economy. But at the same time, then we need our institutional system to change as well, because how is the financing of banks of these kind of systems? What kind of returns are expected from these kind of initiatives? And that is the right-hand figure. It shows that it involves many stakeholders, and you can try to close loops at the local level, but you need to think of, well, what could be the role of residents, how to include them, what could be the local economic model as well, and how does it relate to more beyond local economic models? How does it fit in? So we need to really redesign the way our economy works. Another project that we're working on is the CircumAt Model. It's a model that helps to understand from a regional level where are possible key key factors to influence in our regional economy. And it makes use of regional economic databases to identify the key resources and the biggest flows within your regional economy. And this is something that you can use with regional stakeholders to identify, well, what kind of flows could we address, and where could we go from there. And that is also my final slide of this presentation. This is one of the other projects where we are working now on in TU Delft within our region. We are thinking of, well, how can we perhaps group industries that are needed to, they're unsustainable industries like the concrete, cement, asphalt industry, but we still, they are there, we still need them in the coming years. Is there a way to group them and make them part of our economy in a more circular way? And can they become a circular hub that not only impacts the economy, the regional economy from an environmental point of view, but can we also turn it into an opportunity for economic productivity in terms of jobs, benefits, and social inclusion? So that is, another example of the line of thinking that we are exploring at this moment. It's a very interesting process as well, because we really are engaged with the key stakeholders. And what we learn from this is that there is really a momentum in society at the moment where people understand a change is needed and is about to come, that it might jeopardize their core business, their core values, and at the same time lots of people are willing to explore it and to take a chance with each other, perhaps not over their whole business, but really put and start exploring it. What could be a potential future for us all? And that is where I would like to end my talk. Thank you.